Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're diving into the world of thoracic outlet syndrome surgery.
Oh, it's a fascinating area, really.
And we're going to compare and contrast two different surgical approaches for this condition, pulling out those key insights and points of comparison. So, to help you better understand this really complex procedure.
Yeah, it's really interesting to look at how surgical techniques have actually, evolved to address this because, each approach has its own set of advantages and considerations.
Right, exactly. And the two articles we're kind of dissecting today, they focus on the supraclavicular approach and the transaxillary approach.
Okay.
And those both aim to, alleviate thoracic outlet syndrome.
Right.
So let's start with the supraclavicular approach. It sounds kind of intense when you just say it like that.
It does, doesn't it? It sounds very, I don't know.
Very medical.
Very medical, yeah. Well, so it's a direct route.
Okay.
It allows surgeons, to have this clear visibility of the brachial plexus. And that's that network of nerves running from, your neck to your arm.
Right.
It's essential. And so this approach is particularly valuable when you're dealing with arterial complications,
Right.
like when you need subclavian artery reconstruction.
So if there's a problem with that main artery, this approach is kind of the best way to get in there and repair it.
It is. It is. The article highlights how surgeons carefully navigate, around crucial structures like the phrenic nerve.
Right, which controls your breathing.
Which controls your diaphragm. Imagine having to be that precise.
Oh, my gosh.
And they even remove a portion of the first rib.
Yeah, the article mentioned that. That's some serious, handiwork.
Yeah, it is.
Wow. Okay, so then there's the transaxillary approach, which is going through the armpit. Why would that be a better option? Or why would a surgeon choose that route?
Well, think of it this way. Imagine having the option of a less direct path.
Okay.
Maybe like a scenic route, but with the added benefit of a more discrete scar. And that's what the transaxillary approach is.
Got it.
Less visible scarring.
Okay. Which I'm sure is a big, plus for a lot of people.
Oh, absolutely. And it's often preferred for cases involving, venous thoracic outlet syndrome, or when nerve compression is the primary issue.
Okay.
It tends to be less invasive in those situations.
But if it's less direct, like you said, does that mean it limits what the surgeon can see or even do?
Yeah, that's a good question. While it does offer some benefits, the transaxillary approach, it can sometimes limit visibility and access for the surgeon.
Okay.
Especially compared to that direct supraclavicular route we talked about. If complex arterial work is needed, the transaxillary approach may not be the best option.
Okay. So it's like a trade-off then, like directness and the potential for doing that arterial work versus a less invasive approach, which has, the cosmetic benefit.
Exactly. Yeah. And that's precisely why, a thorough evaluation with a medical professional, an experienced medical professional, is so important to figure out what the best way to treat this is.
Yeah. Not like a one-size-fits-all, obviously.
Yeah. No, definitely not.
Yeah.
And what's really interesting is that, back in the day, there's a procedure called dorsal sympathectomy that was often performed alongside thoracic outlet syndrome surgery.
Okay.
It was very common. And now it's very rarely done.
Oh, wow. Why is that?
It's so interesting how, as we learn more about the human body, things change and our, surgical techniques evolve.
Right.
This is a perfect example of that evolution in action.
Right.
And it just underscores, I think, the importance of research,
Yeah.
ongoing research, ongoing innovation in this field.
Totally. It makes you kind of wonder, what other changes the future holds, for these surgical approaches.
Oh, absolutely.
As we learn more.
Yeah. But for now, why don't we kind of unpack the specifics of each approach?
Okay.
Starting with the supraclavicular method.
Okay, let's do it.
Ready to dive in?
I'm ready. I'm ready to have my mind blown by what surgeons can accomplish.
Yeah.
All right, so let's unpack this supraclavicular approach. What's the surgeon's roadmap for this procedure?
Okay. So picture this. The surgeon, they're going to start by making an incision just above the collarbone, kind of running parallel to it.
Okay.
And it's a strategic location because it gives them, a clear path to that thoracic outlet.
And they have to be so incredibly careful in this area, right? Because we're talking major nerves and blood vessels.
Oh, absolutely. The supraclavicular nerves, those are vital for, shoulder and neck function. Those are located right beneath the skin in this region. So protecting those is top priority.
Right. It's like they're navigating a minefield of critical structures.
It really is. It really is. And so, next they'll carefully work with a couple of muscles. The omohyoid, which connects all the way up to your hyoid bone, which is the one that anchors your tongue, and then the sternocleidomastoid, which helps us turn our heads.
Right.
And so by adjusting these muscles, it gives them a clearer view of the deeper structures.
It's amazing how everything in the body is so connected.
It is.
So they're working their way down to the brachial plexus and that first rib we talked about.
Exactly. And, that phrenic nerve we talked about, the one that controls the diaphragm, that's located right on a muscle called the anterior scalene muscle.
Okay.
And so surgeons take, meticulous care to avoid damaging that.
I can only imagine the precision that requires.
Oh, it's remarkable.
Wow.
And they also have to be mindful of the long thoracic nerve,
Okay.
which runs behind another muscle called the middle scalene muscle.
Okay.
And this nerve is really important for controlling certain arm movements.
So each step of the way, it's not just knowing where these vital structures are, it's knowing how to work around them safely.
Yes, exactly. And to get to that first rib, they'll carefully detach part of the anterior scalene muscle from the rib itself.
Okay.
And this gives them a clear view of the subclavian artery, which is another critical structure that needs to be protected.
It's like they're playing a high-stakes game of anatomical Tetris.
It really is.
Carefully, like moving and adjusting each piece to get where they need to go.
Yes. Yes, good analogy. And then, so here's where it gets really interesting.
Right.
So to actually address that compression, they often need to remove a portion of that first rib.
Right.
And they use a special instrument called a wronger, which is like a tiny set of bone-cutting pliers, and they'll carefully remove the rib piece by piece.
Oh my gosh, I bet that takes incredible steadiness and control.
It does. It does.
Yeah.
And they're not just removing any rib, they're like specifically targeting the part that's causing the compression and making sure that no remnants are left behind, because that could cause issues later on.
Of course, of course.
And get this, patients even begin gentle range of motion exercises the day after surgery.
Wow, that's incredible. Especially considering how intricate this procedure is.
It is.
It really speaks to, obviously the skill of these surgeons, but also just like the advancements in post-operative care.
Yeah, it's really remarkable. Now, while this approach has its advantages, remember that less direct transaxillary approach we talked about,
Right.
that one has its own, fascinating set of steps.
Okay. So let's switch gears a little bit and kind of explore that one. What makes that one unique? So that's all about going through the armpit, right?
Got it.
Okay.
This approach really prioritizes a less visible scar, which, makes it a popular choice for a lot of patients,
Sure.
especially when they're treating certain types of thoracic outlet syndrome, like venous TOS or nerve compression.
Right. So it's like you're opting for this more like hidden entrance to address the problem.
Right.
Yeah.
And while it might seem, on the surface, a bit simpler, right, because the incision is smaller, it's less visible.
Right.
The transaxillary approach has its own set of meticulous techniques that have to be followed.
Okay. So walk me through. What's the surgeon's game plan with this approach?
Okay, so imagine this. The patient's positioned on their side, arm carefully supported. The surgeon will make a small incision just below the armpit hair.
Okay.
And they're working within a really tight space here between two really big muscles, the pectoralis major, which is in the chest, and the latissimus dorsi, which is in the back.
Yeah, those are some powerful muscles.
Yeah.
Surgeons really have to be aware of their surroundings there.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And so they use these special retractors to gently create space.
Okay.
And they have to be incredibly cautious of a nerve called the intercostobrachial nerve, which provides feeling to the inner arm.
I can see why they need those special tools.
Oh.
It's like trying to find a lost contact lens in a crowded room.
That's a great way to put it. Yeah.
And to make sure they have the best possible view, they sometimes even use a tiny camera called a video thoracoscope.
High-tech surgery. So we're picturing a tiny GoPro for the human body.
Yes, exactly.
Wow. Okay. So how do they even get to the first rib from there?
It's pretty amazing how they do this, actually. They'll meticulously work their way to that first rib, and they have to carefully separate it from the, delicate lung lining, which is called the pleura.
That sounds so delicate.
It is.
Yeah.
It requires a ton of precision to avoid any, accidental punctures or tears, because that could lead to a collapsed lung.
Right. That makes sense.
Definitely something you want to avoid.
Definitely want to avoid that. Okay, so once they get to that first rib, do they remove part of it like they do in the supraclavicular approach?
They do.
Okay.
They do. But here's a key